Crude oil is 76 handle, down 1.4%. Natural gas prices are plunging, almost at $2. They're about to cross $2 down to a one handle. And I think this is the lowest since earlier this year. And that was the lowest in years. So we're almost coming down to COVID levels on natural gas prices. One handle is a very rare moment for natural gas. So that's good for inflation concerns.
Dropping energy costs is always good.
Yeah. Yeah, and despite all the wars and geopolitical escalation going on, uh, battles at the Red Sea, concerns around Middle East, oil prices are at 77 handle. So that's really good for inflation stuff. What's on your mind?
I watched another Omar video this morning, and
Yeah.
I found it to be interesting. It's hesitant at four-way stops, but overall seemed to do a pretty good job. So I'm hoping that gets at least another dot revision, or they bump it out wider in the next week or so.
Yeah. Yeah, FSD V12 seems to be doing well. And AI driver tested with Omar. I reposted that yesterday. Watched all the videos. They put out a couple of videos. AI driver seems very impressed with it as well. So that's a good sign, right? Let's see if Machine wants to come up and talk about it or talk about the 10K. I pinned at the top of our screens a link to Patreon if you want to support the space and also read about my notes on the 10K. You can go through that link at the top. Did you have any takeaways or questions on the 10K, Wes?
Not really. It seemed pretty straightforward. I didn't see anything too dramatic in there. I don't know if you did.
No, nothing too surprising. Nothing surprising at all. Just, their capital expenditures are going to be about $10 billion this year, and then more than 10 billion, they said, this year, and then decline to $8 to $10 billion range. That's very high. But also not surprising given all the growth on several fronts with energy and cyberjet production and megapack factories in China and US, battery production lines. So more than $10 billion this year.
I'm all for more R&D spend. More the better.
Well,
They're not.
this is capital. This doesn't include R&D spend. This is capital
Oh, okay.
expenditures alone.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So just for
Yeah,
equipment,
definitely.
factories.
Yeah, more factories, please. That
Mhm.
would be great.
But they're throttling down production in Germany, right? For a few weeks. They said Red Sea, but I don't know if that's the sole cause.
Yeah.
Um, Troy says they have ample inventory. So, but it's a good opportunity for Tesla to just kind of smooth out any sort of production issues that they had, um, get it to a steady state level, kind of breathe a little bit while the interest rates are high still.
Is it your understanding that Berlin is running at kind of like designed max efficiency currently? Because I haven't kept up with it.
Well, I hope so, because they've taken a couple weeks down here and there. So hopefully the efficiency is increasing, and the same for Giga Texas. But I don't really have a way of knowing that.
Yeah, they show their installed capacity to be 375K. Know how much they did this year in 23 though.
Right.
Yeah, it just says in earnings, Model Y production in Berlin continued to grow in Q4, achieving both a record weekly production rate and a sequential increase in total production volume. So they're still increasing. So maybe not quite to 375K yet.
Machine, welcome.
Berlin is nowhere near their capacity. I mean, the whole last 2023. I mean, Troy has been tracking this, and I think their best quarter was Q4, but that still was like 50,000 vehicles over 13 weeks. They've been steady like 3,800, something like that, Model Ys per week. And it's one of the things that pissed me off. And people studying this stuff is that there's some trackers that were trying to do the VIN and trying to force an exponential fit to it, and trying to keep saying that the production rate was higher and higher. Egregious, going up to like 7,000 cars per week. And it was like, no, you're forcing something to this like one data point. You could tell it's linear over time, that the amount of cars produced was just been fixed mostly for 2023. Now, whether or not that's only because I think they're using two shifts, there's not an overnight shift, that maybe the utilization is uh, high for the time that they're actually working, and there's just not an overnight shift. That might be it. And then but even that would take you probably to a little over 5,000 per week, so that would get you to like 250,000 a year. I mean, so they're far away from going to 375,000 a year. They're not close.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I don't really have any deep thoughts. I know there's part of it's demand. They already have excess Model Y inventory in Europe. Um, so I haven't trying to model all this stuff where if you increase the volume, let's say 20-30%, how much do you have to drop prices? Is that equilibrium net profitable for you, even if the profit per car goes down, or do you actually lose profit relative to operating at a more limited supply point? And then
Well, we're supposed to be putting more cars the better, right? Because we're going to push FSDs and they're
this
going to
is
come
not, but like
robotaxis. More cars the better.
this
Super
is a
easy.
lie. It's a lie. It's not the concept. So the concept's not a lie, but the fact is that they haven't ramped up that much over the past year. If you compare from even Q4 2022, it's not like the volume production in these factories is that much higher. Um, and that's probably fine, but to argue that like they're like, well, we're not going to stop growing, like they clearly are not growing um, as quickly. We're not even talking about 50% growth. Like they're not even growing, 25%. And the question just becomes, is that limited by demand, or is there a battery limitation? Because at some point, the 4680 plan is going to limit battery supply, since they've been like, a few years behind. And I remember in 2022, I think they said, oh, it's not going to affect 2023. Um, but then 2023, the growth was lower, and now they're still not producing that much 4680. It's probably like 3 gigawatt hours annualized. So at some point, like you've got to think the batteries would limit it. So I don't know. It's kind of like these dual arguments between, is it demand or is it batteries? And they kind of mask each other. So I think those are the two main things.
I looked up Troy's estimate for 24 Model Y Berlin, and he's showing 226,000 Model Ys in 2024. So well short of the installed capacity, which is interesting.
Yeah. But your question was about efficiency, right? Your question wasn't about capacity utilization.
Right. Efficiency in terms of like, if you have installed capacity for a certain number, then how far are you away from that number? That would be, like an efficiency measure. How well are you using that installed capacity?
Okay. Yeah, I didn't take your question that way.
Oh, sorry. That's what I was wondering though. I say that because in Europe right now, it seems like lots of the traditional car manufacturers are not fully utilizing their factories. So that's less capital efficient, obviously, and they're going to need to downsize. But I'm curious why Berlin wouldn't be marching quicker towards that, and why they didn't talk more about that in earnings.
Yeah, they have a
That'd
debate
be a
in
question
Germany,
I would have
obviously.
asked.
People, I think Europe is very much way more liberal. I mean, I should have known that. I grew up there. I was born in Europe, grew up with that mentality, and didn't realize that, Troy says there's ample inventory, the sales are not there, and therefore they're throttling production. It's very simple. It's not more complicated than that.
Are you saying Europeans are more liberal? You're saying this is a political issue in terms of not wanting to buy Teslas?
Yeah, it's like, just think of a giant California.
I mean, it's possible. But I think that effect in the U.S., like, okay, so maybe Europe more so than the U.S., because in the U.S., I don't think it's a political issue. I think it's an EV issue. But it would make sense that in Europe it'd be less of an EV issue. I think they're more educated on EVs. There's a higher percent of EVs being purchased of total cars there. So I haven't studied Europe specific. If we see prices for other EVs being affected less than Teslas, maybe.
The other EVs suck. I think it is a wonder why anyone's buying any other EV at this point. They suck. So I think that's a false equivalence you're talking about here.
Yeah, but the in Europe, people don't have to travel that far, and also the speeds are lower. So the range of the cars, you kind of work better in Europe than in the U.S. People aren't blasting at 80 miles an hour in Europe. I guess maybe on the Autobahn, but so I don't know. I feel like even those EVs with smaller batteries, like they probably still can do well in Europe.
Okay.
They also, by the way, wait, just
go ahead.
a quick add. The complexity of charging outside of superchargers, they also, which I don't know the density in Europe how that compares to the U.S., but it probably higher density. But then the level two, it's much simpler home charging, because even if you have just a basic level one, quote level one charger in Europe, it's 240 volts, not 120, and so you're getting double the power out even from a home plug, and that actually makes a huge difference in terms of utility. So I don't know. Again, I think these other EVs can still do fine in Europe.
Okay. So I pinned at the top a poll about Tesla's margins for Q1 2024 machine. Do you think automotive margins, will be lower or higher than Q4 2023?
That is a good question. That's a tough one. I would say I still think they might be a little lower.
Dude, you can't eat
Oh,
when you're a speaker
man.
in the space. If you're gonna eat food, move down to listener mode, and I'll just talk about other stuff. It's very disrespectful of all the people who listen and all the people on YouTube, and you're talking thousands of people are listening to you chewing. It's not good.
Well, just so you know,
So
I
if you're gonna
apologize.
eat, go down to listener mode.
I apologize. I won't eat while I'm talking. Just to let you know, I am eating filet mignon, home cooked.
Well, I can tell.
Uh,
I can tell, and it's I was listening to the space the other day too, and you're doing the same thing. Like, is this your lunch hour, hobby?
it's it's 12:20. Of course, it's lunch.
Just finish your food and then come
Well,
back.
I don't
Like,
know.
there's
Now
no
you asked me the
rush.
question. I'm not
There's no
chewing right now.
requirement for you to be on speaker mode.
The margins I would bet they're a little lower in Q1 for automotive gross margins than Q4 because of some of the inventory price cuts and all that. And the Model 3, we're still not sure. I do think, however, hopefully the operating margin of the whole business will be higher. Hopefully on the back of overall increased efficiency via service revenues going up, especially the energy. In one of these quarters, they had that Hawaii deal, for instance, for the megapacks being recognized this quarter. That there should be higher revenue from energy this quarter, I hope. Although I've been saying it the last few quarters, but that would put the operating margin up higher.
Okay, so you're saying margins will be higher in Q1 versus Q4. Is that what you said?
No, automotive gross margins will probably be lower. Operating margin could be higher.
Okay. Interesting.
And your poll question was vague because it wasn't specific.
Well, I didn't realize people thought maybe.
You didn't realize that there's different margins. I would expect better from you as a CPA.
I mean, so sorry. Why did you say? I kind of checked that for a second. Why did you say operating margins will be better, even though gross margins will be lower?
Because the automotive, you verbally asked automotive gross margins, and I think automotive gross margins could be a bit lower in Q1 than Q4, and I gave some reasons. But obviously, operating margins about other things too, and even just one of those things, let's say energy margins and revenue, or just revenue itself, I expect to be higher in Q1 than Q4, and I expect overall operating margin then to be actually higher.
Interesting. I'm trying to think why that might be. How confident are you that operating margins will be higher in Q1 than Q4?
I'm not very confident. I don't. It's not like I've modeled all this stuff. But so the question is, you get to fiddle with how many operating costs are there, variable operating costs with the energy division. So that if you have a 20% increase in revenue and 20% increase in fixed costs, what are the variable costs there? I would think that's a business that can scale pretty well, so that the operating margin contribution from that is pretty positive and goes up as you scale revenue. So that to the net business, then that's a big contributor, even if the automotive is slightly worse.
I mean, I guess that's one question right there we can dig into a little bit. Let's focus on automotive gross margin for now. Okay, you're saying it might be slightly worse. Wes, you sent out a tweet or a DM to the group yesterday. I thought maybe you were joking,
Yep.
but are you joking or no?
No, I'm wondering.
Okay.
Go ahead.
you think that I don't want to say it. You say it.
So with the point of sale discount now, I'm wondering how that's going to show up in Q1 earnings and if it's going to change based on Q4. And so will that actually reduce cost of goods sold when that's taken at point of sale? Or will that, maybe it'll be reduction in ASP? I'm wondering how that's going to show up. And since it's being done at earnings, is it possible that it will show up in increased automotive margins because that's being taken at time of sale? So I'm interested to know how that's going to be handled. And the accountant on X, he surmised that it would actually reduce COGS. And when I asked Bard was uncertain. Bard thought it could potentially be one of three things. It may not show up on earnings at all materially, or it could be ASP, or it could be COGS. So I think it's kind of up in the air, honestly. What do you think?
I have to think about it. Omar, what do you think? Omar, are you there? Welcome.
Yeah, hey. What was the question?
So the $7,500 that is now point of sale, where would that show up on the income statement? And I think Wes, one thing
Revenue.
to kind of note, Wes, is only Model Y and only in US that applies, right? The Model 3 doesn't
Totally.
qualify. Model S
Yeah.
doesn't qualify. Some Model X sales, but how many people are really getting the bare bones Model X? Model S doesn't qualify, we said. The Cybertruck, not that many, and only in US. So how many vehicles are we talking here?
I'd have to go back to earnings and look. I'll find the number.
So we have 5,000 a week at Fremont, 5,000 a week at Giga Texas. So 10,000. So we're talking about 100,000 vehicles. So 20% of production.
You're saying there's only 100,000 Model Ys that could potentially take advantage of this in 2024?
Not in 2024, in Q1.
Oh, just in Q1. Okay, gotcha.
Right. So we're focused on
that sounds
Q1
about right.
2024 margins versus Q3 2023. So 100,000, and only a portion of them will, qualify for it. So, but let's stick with 100,000 for a second. We're talking less than $1 billion. So a few $100 million impact, and it has to be tax affected, obviously. So we're talking maybe a $500 million impact. We're talking, right? $500 million.
Sounds about right.
And so 0.5 divided by maybe a 2% margin impact, maybe 1 to 2%, I would say.
All-wheel drive.
Why would there be a margin impact? I mean, it's pretty much as good as cash. They literally send you cash within 3 days. So cash flow not impacted. It shows up basically like the customer paid it themselves. And if they're a business or whatever, then you still just get it as cash and they claim it on their taxes. But with the point of sale credit, they transfer it to you and the treasury gives you cash within 3 days.
Well, cash that's the balance sheet, right? So how is it going to show up on the income statement?
Revenue. I mean, it's just the revenue. It's the cash they paid for the car.
I think, Omar, are you saying that it's not going to be any different, in other words?
No, I don't know. I don't know if it's going to be just a revenue thing.
What would it be otherwise?
Well, the manufacturing credits are COGS, right? And
Well,
okay,
I mean, so under the old system, I claim a $7,500 credit. That's not Tesla's issue. I just give them the cash. So they just see the cash. They don't even see the credit. Now, under the new system, I can transfer the credit to them, and there's a website that they can use, and the government will transfer the cash to them within 3 days. So, really, whether the cash is coming from me and then the government's reimbursing me or the government's reimbursing them, it really isn't that much of a difference. At the end of the day, if you looked at their cash flow would be unchanged, other than, of course, there probably being increased demand from the apparent price the consumer's paying being lower.
so you're welcome. How are you? What do you think?
Hey guys, what was the topic?
The topic is the 7500. So Wes proposed to the speaker group. I'm sure you saw that message. That maybe the $7,500 credit could reduce COGS. And Omar is saying that it doesn't make a difference to COGS. It's going to be increased revenue to the extent that it increases demand versus
Yeah, it's
otherwise
definitely not going to
possible.
reduce COGS. I mean, COGS are the physical materials that go into the car, the costs, right? It's not a cost, it's just revenue.
Yeah, I think I agree with Omar. I don't think it'll have much impact or versus the previous system from last year. Outside of demand, of course.
Wes, there you go. Are you convinced?
By the way, I
It'll
woke
be
up this morning and my roommate said, "Hey, I ordered a Model Y." And then we went and we test drove the new Model 3. And it looks like he's going to be buying a Model Y and claiming the point of sale credit. So we'll have firsthand experience with how that works for the first time.
Wes?
That's super cool. Yeah, I was interested that the credits that have already been coming in have been at the battery level, and so those have reduced COGS. But now that it's point of sale, I do think that it's going to be
Those are two
looked
different.
at
Those are
differently.
two
Yeah.
different topics.
No,
The
I know, but yeah.
manufacturing credits reduce COGS. Battery manufacturing credits reduce COGS. The $7,500 credit is a different topic. Machine?
No, never mind.
Yeah,
I mean, I
one's
don't
just
think
like
even
a
the
company
credit
credit.
reduces COGS, does it? It's more like just a cash benefit or, a subsidy that the government's giving you. Your COGS are still the same, but you're now getting this extra cash that offsets it and makes you more profitable.
Yeah,
Well,
I think Tesla's recognizing those monies as a contra COGS account. Machine?
except for the 2170, which is really a Panasonic credit, and they're passing it along to Tesla, at least partially via lower costs. So that part is probably getting embedded as lower COGS.
Right, I mean, that's definitely lower COGS because Panasonic's passing, like you said. But the 4680 manufacturing credits is also contra COGS, right? It reduces COGS. Tesla's recognizing that way.
Yeah, that's a good point. Tesla had an agreement with Panasonic where they said any tax credits you get, you must reduce our purchase price by essentially 50% of that value. So essentially we're splitting the credits. So that would result in a lower, cost of goods sold because they're buying battery cells cheaper.
Yeah, that's why it's so important that the 4680s ramp up at Giga Texas, because then Tesla can capture that full amount.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy. Like you're seeing in China, they have LFP batteries selling for $56 a kilowatt hour, and the advanced manufacturing credit in the US is for up to $45 a kilowatt hour. So before we were saying it was like half the cost of the pack. Now it could be like most of the cost of the pack. It could make EVs just extremely cost competitive with ICE.
So, what do you think about the poll at the top? Q1 2024 margins, will they be lower or higher than Q3 2023?
I think they'll be higher. It sort of remains to be seen how much more expensive the new Model 3 is to build in the US versus the old one, and they didn't change the price. But even if it was a little bit more expensive, maybe Tesla's cost efficiencies continue into Q1 like they did with Q3 and Q4. So that sort of cancel each other out. Um, but no, I think in general, I think we've sort of bottomed out in the margins, and we'll see about rates. I don't probably we're more looking like Q2 with rate cuts, but I think margins will be flat, if not a little bit better in Q1. That'd be my guess.
That's my guess as well.
Well, that's the poll's guesses as well. The poll's results, 37% said higher than Q4 2023, 38% said about the same, only 25% said lower than Q4.
I mean, the only reason I think people would think it'd be lower is either Tesla's costs go up, which won't happen, I don't think, um, or they cut prices again, which they haven't yet.
So you think ASP will be higher in Q1 than Q4? Or about the same?
Mm, about the same, maybe a little bit higher.
Interesting.
This about the same option is really pulling a lot of weight here because
Yeah.
Well,
really,
call about the same is, let's say, less than 1% lower or higher than Q4. Okay? Less
yeah, I
than
would say it's
1% lower or higher.
in there. I said less, but I think it's going to be within 1%. Automotive gross margin. Yeah, I don't think it's going to be more than 1% off.
I
Yeah.
don't know. Interesting.
You don't know
Yeah,
which
so
way.
I think it might be lower. Just because the
Yeah.
primary reason why I think it might be lower in Q1 is the following. New inventory discounts started at the beginning of the quarter. Like, it's going to impact the entire quarter, this quarter, versus last quarter. It was only in December, right? Am I wrong in that?
No, you're right. But I would argue that because they introduced the new 3 and that doesn't qualify for the EV tax credit, that might push more people towards the Model Y, which is a higher ASP. We'll see, though. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to know.
I mean, there's a lot of moving pieces. If I had to bet on it, I'd probably guess it would be, I don't know, like a few basis points lower or something. You have a situation where people are really looking at the automotive gross margin. And if they can really show that the automotive gross margin has bottomed, however they do it, by reducing COGS, by stabilizing ASPs, whatever, then that's going to be a really good sign. There's probably a lot of people who are looking at Tesla and saying, okay, I like this company. I want to buy in, but let's wait until we reach that sort of pivot point. And we did see gross margin for the automotive improve sequentially in Q4, but Q3 was also a quarter where they had a lot of downtime. So it's hard to really know if that's a fair comp. We would really, I think probably have to see one more quarter to know for sure if we're really sort of reach that pivot point. If automotive gross margin improved sequentially again, that would be an extremely positive sign. Of course, there's like so many moving pieces. There's COGS, there's pricing discounts they give. There's also the Cybertruck. They're ramping that up, and I expect the margin on that's very negative. So that probably is informing their comments about it being a slower ramp. They probably don't want to produce too many and sort of ruin their margins. So that's probably a factor too. And they're going to manage that well. I don't think they would produce too many Cybertruck to the point where it would ruin the quarter or whatever. But that is going to be a headwind. The ramp up of the new Model 3 in North America could be a headwind. So we'll kind of have to see. It would be extremely encouraging and definitely something we need if they could show a sequential improvement in automotive gross margin again. But my base assumption is kind of that we see a relatively minor sort of sequential decline.
Yeah, I'm with Omar there. And that's with gross margins, right, Omar? So do you agree with Machine that operating margins might increase from quarter to quarter?
Yeah.
All right, sounds like we're on the same page. Slightly lower gross margins on the automotive side, maybe slightly higher operating margins. I think energy is doing well. I mean, energy is growing well. Margins are healthy.
$6 billion of revenue. Not bad.
Yeah, in 2023, $6 billion of revenue. And it's actually becoming a material part of the business now, with higher margins, higher growth rates, and sizable revenues.
6 billion isn't nothing. That could be, a very valuable public company if it was listed separately.
How much do you think it would be valued? If Tesla Energy, that's a great question. Good topic to kind of talk about a little bit. If Tesla Energy was a separate business today, how much do you think it would be valued?
I mean, it's hard to kind of separate the value. So much of it is really Tesla's expertise, their integration with their ecosystem and everything. But let's take a look. How much profit did Energy make?
I mean, Adam, it's good to point out, though, that Tesla Energy is actually easier to value as a separate business than Tesla Automotive versus, let's say, FSD separate than Tesla Automotive, right? Or 4680s separate than Tesla Automotive. Tesla Energy, not much overlap there between the automotive in terms of employees and technology and everything.
It's pretty incredible that Tesla's energy business alone has almost 2.5 times as much revenue now as X does. It's what's funny to think about.
Services and other revenue is 8.3 billion, bigger than energy, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, a lot of that is used cars. So I was listening
Right,
to the
yeah.
earnings space while the earnings, was released, and people mentioned supercharging revenues, body repair revenues, out of warranty repair kind of stuff. But they didn't mention used car. Used car sales, I think, is like at least half of that segment. So it's the biggest driver of services and other revenues. But putting that aside for a second, back to Tesla Energy. $6 billion revenue in 2023, 50% year-over-year growth. Okay. Margins are better than Tesla Automotive.
But they haven't disclosed it.
Well, Megapack margins are, I think, safe to say. I mean, Machine, would you agree? Megapack margins, which is, the large portion of energy.
Yeah, I mean, you can calculate that the gross margins of energy in total is over 20% now, and that's still without Megapack, the Lathrop facility, scaled. I mean, they're still only producing half at capacity and only recognizing less than half so far in these quarters. So I just imagine that the gross margin could go up a bit more, maybe get to 25%. There's a lot of people, obviously, in the last year arguing that the margins can be extremely high over time, and as the lithium prices have come down, maybe we can get to 30%. And if you take a look at the gross profit on a single quarter right now, you're maybe around 400 million from energy, and I'm assuming most of that is from Megapack. But that's on recognized revenue recognized gigawatt hours of about four, a little less than four. And keep in mind, even at the steady state, it should be five right now. And then when they get scaled to 40 gigawatt hours annualized from that facility, that should be 10 per quarter. So if we assume full scaled Lathrop and even a half scaled Shanghai, and we just try to model that in terms of gross profit, we might be able to get in a year $6 billion in gross profit. That's my quick calculation. So I don't know what forward PE ratio you would give $6 billion of profit.
You wouldn't. Hold on. You would not give a PE ratio to gross profits. Earnings is net earnings.
I know.
Okay, so you have
I
some
know.
operating expenses,
Yes.
some tax effects. Go ahead.
I don't have that information. That's gross, right? I agree. So, but you're not going to give. But I would argue you're going to give something higher than 10, right? I don't know.
I honestly I'm really hesitant about putting a multiple on gross profit. So just make some assumptions on operating expenses and then tax rate, and then apply your
All right.
PE ratio.
Do we think operating margin on just megapacks will be 15%, 20%, or less or more? Like,
Let's start with Omar, Sawyer, Wes. Do you think Megapack operating margin will be higher or lower than 15-20%?
Probably in that range, I think. I mean, it's probably going to be a little bit easier than the auto business, but probably in that range, 15 to 20% maybe.
I think it'll be over 20% for the Shanghai mega factory that's going to come online. But what makes this a little difficult to estimate is like Tesla dropped Megapack prices a little over 20% in Q4. So are the prices and margin stuff we're seeing now account for that, or have we yet to see those sort of trickle down into, or have those Megapacks not been installed yet? We'll see.
Wes?
Yeah, exactly. I was wondering the same thing. As the Lathrop facility continues to ramp up, as well as those price cuts, when are we going to realize that? So they're offsetting.
And on the other
Yeah.
hand, you have the declining lithium prices as well, which is a material expense for the energy business. So you're going to recognize the benefit of those as well as the prices declining. So I would just assume, as a rule of thumb, they should be approximately the same. I mean, it might be some sort of quarter difference here and there, but I would think operating margin for Megapacks should be more than 20%. But let's say 20%, unless if somebody has, want to argue the other side. I would assume 20% operating margin for Megapack business. That doesn't mean Tesla energy margins will be 20% because there's other stuff like energy generation, and energy generation.
I
Omar?
assume Tesla dropping the price 20% has more to do with just their dropping COGS rather than demand issues, because obviously I think the wait time it's not quite 2 years like it used to be, but I think it's still like 18 months ish.
Exactly. Omar?
All right, so I've decided the company is worth $35 billion.
you're crazy.
Yeah, I think if you were to spin it out, and I'm not advocating this, but I think if you were to spin out this business, Wall Street would probably give it a higher multiple because battery energy storage essentially the same business as making an EV, except it's way simpler. Instead of making a car, you just have like this box which can be, controlled by a UI. And it's growing, at like 80% in the United States this year, and it's not cyclical, right? These buyers are like moving at an institutional scale. They're not as subject to like the consumer credit cycle. So I think you'd probably get a higher multiple on earnings than Tesla, the auto business, for the energy business, just because of the nature of that business, how it's growing much faster, how the margins are higher, and how it doesn't seem to be as cyclical as the auto business.
I think it'd be more than 35, just based on the growth, 50+% growth year over year, and then the nearly quadrupled profits in 2023.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to be fair, so I would probably look at this as like an institutional investor and say maybe, okay, well, BYD has a battery product, CATL has a battery product. Why is Tesla going to dominate? And, as a Tesla shareholder, I'd respond, well, they got software, they got auto bidder, they got this virtual power plant technology, they got all this really advanced stuff they're doing, integration with their ecosystem, scale, these factories. But, I think that's probably about fair for where they are.
Machine.
Yeah, I did some number crunching, assuming an operating margin of 15% and revenues on 60 gigawatt hours, which is just what I expect from Lathrop and a half online Shanghai by middle of next year. That and assuming revenue per pack goes down 20% of what it was in Q4, that I'm getting a operating income of over 3 billion. And so I would think if you applied some, ratio, at least of like 30 to that, I think you're getting over 100 billion in value
Yeah, I
on what
agree.
you get in a year, in a year from now. And obviously, people start forecasting if they decide to open up more facilities. They'll try to model it out further. Higher revenue, a little bit lower revenue per pack, but operating margins might stay, relatively steady because and the fixed costs might spread out some. And then you can obviously get higher valuations too. So I would say today, I would value it around 100 billion.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly the same thing. There
Finally,
you go.
smart. Finally.
Yeah, $100 billion. I thought it was higher, but the growth rate dropped a little bit, declined. So, but 100 billion on a standalone basis for Tesla energy business, I think is reasonable. Omar, are you convinced it's 100 billion, or do you still think it's 35?
Well, as the Tesla shareholder, I like the sound of 100 billion, so I'm willing to go with that valuation. Tesla's trading at a $600 billion market cap. I think the present value of FSDs may be somewhere around 500 billion. So, okay, between FSD and energy, you got 600 billion. You get the auto business for free.
So let's switch to FSD for a second. I was thinking about that, the value of it. And I think that really hinges on what probability do you assign that Tesla will actually achieve autonomous driving. That 80% of people in their cars either subscribe or buy, and then an eventual road to robotaxi. I think you obviously assign a high probability. I assign a high probability. Machine, I believe, does as well, but maybe lower than my and Omar's probability. Right, Machine?
Sorry, give me a second.
So let's say 80% probability between Omar. What do you think is the probability of Tesla achieving full self-driving, where you kind of put it on and check out. You can do other things in the car, not even robotaxi, but you can do other things in the car. What percent probability do you assign to that future? Let's say in 3 to 5 years.
99%.
Yeah, I would say the same. Wes probably around there too, right, Wes?
Yeah, probably more like 95, but yeah, more or
Right.
less the same.
95. And Sawyer?
I'd be in like the 90, 95 range.
Yeah. Okay. So we're all above 90. I would think machine is probably above 90 as well. But maybe more like 90 to 95 like Sawyer. Omar, what do you think is the problem that the market assigns to that feature? That Tesla will achieve full self-driving, where you kind of put it on and you can check out, do other things in the car, but not necessarily a robotaxi feature in the next 3 to 5 years. What do you think is the market placing on that?
5 to 10%.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. Market is placing 5 to 10%. And really, the conversation should involve when Tesla does achieve it, will it be able to charge an economic profit? Or will the profits be competed away by Waymo, Mobileye, and other players? That's really the crux of the debate right now in Tesla's valuation. Because if the Tesla energy business is $100 billion and automotive margins and growth rate is lower than Tesla energy, the current market cap minus those two is really mostly around Tesla's ability to achieve full self-driving. I think most people in this space probably think 80% or higher, but the market, I agree with Omar, thinks it's more like 5 to 10%. So Wes, sorry, who just came off of mute?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I was at this WeWork office in Chinatown last night working. They have faster internet there. And so then I took a Waymo home and it was like driving through Chinatown, like making all these crazy moves. And, they've really got it working to the point where it can do anything. And FSD 12 is actually already driving smoother and better than it in many cases. It still has more interventions and accelerator presses, but the end-to-end framework has already produced like maneuvers that I haven't seen a Waymo be able to do, and like smoother driving, less wheel jittering. It's really kind of remarkable. So I think the investment world hasn't accepted enough as a conclusion that yeah, we actually did figure out how to make self-driving work at a safety level greater than a human. And Waymo did a study. They said 80% of injury causing crashes were reduced. So you could reduce 80% with the technology they have today. And Tesla's with their V12 basically going to make that available in a generalized way. So, forget about Tesla for a second. Autonomy is definitely coming, and regardless of who owns it, right? Even if Tesla doesn't figure it out and they have to license it from somebody else, let's say they have to license it from Waymo or Baidu or somebody, it's still going to change the nature of the auto business forever, right? So there's like this tidal wave coming. And Tesla's been preparing. They've been saying, okay, we want to sort of own this technology ourselves. But it's going to transform, I think, pretty much every aspect of the business.
Even if Waymo were to figure it out, maybe at the same time Tesla does, they don't have a fleet to just flip the switch on and start doing robotaxis. They gotta either retrofit existing vehicles or buy up a bunch of other legacy auto manufacturing vehicles. So it's kind of difficult for them to scale. I mean, they're only doing like Tesla does as many FSD beta miles per day, I think, as Waymo does in like 1 or 2 years. So I don't know what their fleet looks like at scale.
Yeah, while Sawyer was talking, 3 more Teslas that can run FSD were produced. One is produced every 20 seconds now at the 2023 run rate. Waymo has 1,000 cars total. Tesla's going to make 40,000 cars this week.
I think a lot of people get caught up in the who will get there first. But even if you get there first, can you do it at scale? And like, even if Tesla doesn't get there first, which I think they will, they can do it at scale pretty simply, just because they already have a fleet of 5.5 million vehicles. And maybe BYD has a large fleet too, but
Well,
Waymo, Cruise, all of them will have a difficult time.
so Waymo is already there. Right? Waymo already has autonomous driving. They're expanding to multiple cities. They're buying more cars. They're working on their own purpose-built robotaxi design as well. So they're there first. I agree with Sawyer that getting to scale is the more important question, but we also should not discount. Like, we should be talking about the probability of Tesla being able to charge. Let's get what Wes has to say first. Wes?
Yeah, the ability for any solution to scale is predominantly the issue at hand. Because like you could essentially today you could take a trained model and use an inference size that's enormous and potentially solve it, but you can't put that in a vehicle and drive around like that would driving with a data center in the vehicle. The whole purpose of this is to make it small enough to fit into a car to drive around with. And that's what Tesla's doing. And Waymo just hasn't really figured that out yet because their vehicle is far too expensive to scale. And it'd take forever to build them because it's all bespoke. Every one of those vehicles is unique. So that therein lies the problem with scale. But that was kind of like a little thing that I wanted to say. And then I also wanted to ask Omar a few questions on his recent drives, but that can wait.
Yeah, just wait on that for a second. So Wes, let me ask you, fast forward 3 to 5 years, how many Tesla robotaxis are operating on the roads in US roads without a driver, and how many Waymo vehicles are operating without a driver?
The short version to your answer is I did that calculation, and I calculated 2 million dedicated 24/7 robotaxis are needed to take over completely the rideshare market. And that's not the normal like 2 trillion miles that US roads handle every year, but that's just all the rideshare current demand miles. And obviously Tesla would decimate any competitor because they can operate at much less cost per mile. So I don't see there being any competition once they solve FSD. I just don't see how. There's just no TAM left available for any other competitor.
Omar, do you agree with that statement? When Tesla solves FSD and we have 2 million Teslas taking over the rideshare market without a driver in 3 to 5 years, there won't be a competitor. Or Tesla will be able to operate at a much lower cost per mile than others.
I mean, so there's almost no market in the world where there isn't competition. So, of course, you would expect ride sharing to become, kind of a commoditized market one way or another naturally. But I mean, you're talking like trillions of miles traveled, right? So you're talking like a multi-trillion-dollar market. If you can capture, let's say, a third of a $5 trillion market, that can be, over $1 trillion of revenue a year. So I don't expect them to be the only player, but I expect them to be one of the largest scale players. And that's really what matters to people. They want to call a ride and have it show up quickly and have it be fast, have it be reliable, have it load all their settings, all the things we love about sort of the Tesla software experience today. And nobody really has a path to having the software or the hardware or the production. And Tesla's doing all three at the same time.
Sawyer, do you have any thoughts on the topic?
No, the last thing I'll just add is with Waymo, obviously they're backed by Google, so they've really deep pockets. So if they want to get into, building their own vehicle, they certainly can, but it'd be harder for other places. Oh, and one correction on the thing I said earlier today. The Mega Pack waiting time is not 18 months. It's actually, you can get one in Q4 of this year. So it's dropped quite a bit.
I mean, I don't worry about Waymo really. I look at comma actually. Like, okay, if someone can just buy a little thing for $1,000 and add an open source FSD to their car, that might actually be much more successful than Waymo. I mean, Waymo's business model is, one where they burn billions of dollars of cash. Comma's actually profitable. So I would probably look at them honestly more than Waymo.
When do you think is Comma changing lanes yet, Omar?
No. I mean, Comma doesn't like, i- you know, they don't really have the same kind of hardware suite. They kind of have one thing. It's kind of like a dash mounted GPS, and it's got a forward camera and it's got kind of like two rear facing side cameras, but there aren't actually like any cameras on the car. The last time I saw a demo of their end to end system, they were using the blind spot indicator for lane changes. So they weren't even like looking to see if there was something there. They were just kind of using the car's blind spot indicator, which obviously is not really a very high fidelity view. So their sensor suite is pretty limited. So we'd really be looking at something in the future, probably with an expanded sensor suite, maybe with cameras you can mount around the car, mount to the window or something like that. Um, or I believe it should be possible just with like a 360 cam on a dash mounted device. I believe that by 2030 it should be possible theoretically to buy a GPS sized device, like a Garmin sized device with a camera that, was just on your windshield and could see 360, see out your windows, and that should be able to drive the car. Or you should be able to have like a humanoid robot that could drive any car just by turning its head.
Okay, so if a Tesla bear comes to you, so by the way, guys, I have to play a little bit of devil's advocate because I've been listening to these recordings and I'm like, we're just agreeing on a lot of things, and that doesn't make a good debate. So Omar, if someone comes to you and says, in 2030, exactly what you just said, in 2030, either you can get a 360 camera, put on any car, it'll be drive itself, or buy a humanoid that can drive any car, then the value of FSD, full self driving for Teslas, is not hundreds of billions of dollars, trillion dollars. What do you say to them to convince them otherwise to buy Tesla stock?
I think that Tesla could be doing over $1 trillion of revenue in 2030 from FSD and related Tesla network services. When you look at, 30% of all the rides happening on the platform, plus people, buying packages, buying subscriptions, buying plans, whatever the hell the pricing looks like at that time, we're really talking about i- transportation globally. People drive trillions of miles a year. So when the market goes from buying cars every few years to buying travel by the mile, there's going to be this huge demand for people to call cars to get around. And if they take even, a quarter of the market or something, it's hundreds of billions of dollars, if not trillions. So I think the market opportunity is absolutely huge. Obviously, in any market in cars, you expect it to be competitive, but autonomy will probably be a many fewer players compared to the automotive market. In the automotive market, you really have a ton of players and they're all very sort of competitive with each other. In autonomy, I expect there to really be not more than three large players. Um, and the reason for that is just really the flywheel, the data advantage. You have the best system, so people keep using it, so it keeps getting better, so it becomes the best system. And kind of like how we have iOS and Android and or Mac, Windows, Linux, that kind of thing. When you have these sort of tech platforms with network effects, it tends to sort of coalesce around two or three big platforms. And I think Tesla is going to be one of them. I think there will be others. I think one of them could be a Chinese company. They have actually incredible AI talent in China. And maybe there'll be a third, maybe there won't be. But it's a much more winner take most or winner take all sort of market compared to automotive hardware because of the sort of network effects inherent in this AI flywheel.
Very good. Thank you.
Like you know, a lot of people don't realize the Tesla drives better than the Waymo. It's smoother, it jitters less with V12, and you can really see the power of having all that data from so many different edge cases. Like I could videotape it and you could see the wheel, jerking around in a Waymo compared to how smooth it is in
Actually,
FSD.
that's a really good transition to what Wes was going to ask you. A couple of questions before that. Quick note that we have a link at the top if you want to support the space. Sign up for Patreon, and you can do it through the link at the top, which goes to my notes on Form 10K filing for Tesla. All right, Wes. Questions for Omar on V12.
Yeah, you'll probably remember this. It was a left turn that you did not think the vehicle was going to make, but it ended up kind of like going through the intersection and then actually did make the left turn, and you were wondering if that was legal or not. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so in San Francisco, when you're sort of coming up from the freeway, the street branches into two directions. I think Hayes Street and Geary or something, or Pine. And so the first time it did it, it actually did go to the left side. But this time, for whatever reason, there was heavy traffic and it kind of stayed on the right side. And it was able to just make a really sharp, like, it can make lane changes like you can't even imagine. Like, we thought V11 was good with lane changes. This thing can make lane changes so close and really just sort of like dip in there. It was crazy. Like, there was like, tight traffic and it just sort of slipped in there. And then there was kind of like an area of the road where it could go over and make a left turn, and it made a left turn. So, there was some debate. Some people were saying, oh, it shouldn't have done that. That's illegal, whatever. Even though, there's nothing wrong with changing. It's not illegal to change lanes in an intersection. It's frowned upon because, you can potentially cause confusion. But, what would a human do? Would they say, oh, I can't change lanes in an intersection? Or would they try to avoid missing the turn? But then the other crazy thing is, I didn't even think there was a way to get in there. And then there was that little dip there. But that's exactly what I, as a human, would have done. So it makes sense that if you just show it humans driving, that's the kind of stuff we do. If we're about to miss a turn, we don't miss the turn. We always try and go the right way if we can. And that's always been a reason to not use FSD, is like it can make stupid mistakes like that. If you're just sort of spacing out, it might totally miss a turn. And now you wasted an extra 5, 10 minutes, whatever, or potentially get caught in some really bad traffic jam because it missed a turn. So, there's really two areas of this. There's should it do it and can it do it? So the should, okay, yeah, we can debate should it do it. You can refine that over time, sort of, you know, massage the training data set, train it to do what you think is the appropriate thing. But what I really was astounded by is the fact that it could do it. The fact that it could make that lane change with really tight moving traffic and sneak in there when I thought that, all hope is lost. It's missed the turn. So it was definitely sort of an interesting moment. It has done things that are sort of like, questionable, but always very human.
Yeah, I found that turn to be fascinating because it did seem on some level to have more knowledge of the road than the human does. And I was wondering if it sounds like you think it might kind of feel like that too. And it didn't seem like it did something illegal. I wouldn't say that because it was technically after the intersection because it's that extra left that's available in that intersection. That left is available there. But I thought
Yeah,
that
I
was
think it was
fascinating.
actually perfectly legal.
Yeah. And I was kind of amazed by it because I have yet to really see an example of FSD knowing about lanes or road segments ahead of it and using that in its kind of path planning and controls. And that was like one example where I could say potentially it was potentially doing that.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't believe the moves this thing pulls off sometimes. It's kind of crazy. Like, it is just remarkably human like. I mean, you kind of just accept that FSD is a certain way. You're like, okay, I kind of just can't do that. And then you just see this version doing things that, you know, you never imagined FSD doing before. It's pretty crazy. Like it can make some really tight maneuvers.
Wes, any other questions for Omar or any comments that you want to make on FSD V12 before we wrap it up?
Yeah, maybe one. It seems like the first set of videos that you were putting out, you were overtaking when you had to press the throttle. But now I'm seeing less of that. I feel like there's less times where you have to do that, and also I'm seeing that it's hesitant at four-way stops when there's a stop sign. And I was wondering if it wasn't as hesitant there, what other things do you think would be like kind of the top issues that you would have you would want it to see fixed first?
Well, it's actually way better at four-way stops. It stops, it goes at its turn, just like a normal person. It's good at asserting itself if it's crowded and there's a lot of people and scooters and everything. Instead of getting stuck, it can kind of like creep in a little bit. It's really like amazing. Like I posted this clip of this really crowded street, Union Street, and there's all these people. It's the day of the 49ers game. And there's all these people walking around, getting into cars, doing all this stuff. And it just waits and finds its opportunity and crosses. And we had AI driver do the same thing the night before when it wasn't even as crowded. And he had to press the accelerator pedal several times to get through there. So it was able to get through with no accelerator press. The one issue that I have been having at stop signs, and this is kind of funny, is if I'm at a stop sign and there's a traffic light ahead of me that's red, it will not move from the stop sign until the light turns green. So there are like a few places that have this, like a stop sign, and then there's a traffic light up ahead here in San Francisco. But I'm guessing in the training data set, they only showed it examples where like red light equals red, or at least they didn't show it enough examples of like a stop sign and a red light. So somehow it just picked up on red light equals red. So I see that stop. And they really need to show it more examples where, okay, the light's red, but you're at a stop sign. So go from the stop sign and proceed forward. So I expect they're already fixing that. They told me when they called me, they're like, look, there's some really obvious, stupid stuff in here, but we just wanted you to see kind of like the general thing. And so that would probably be the biggest thing if they fix that. I would have like probably 75% of my accelerator presses have been related to that issue. And there is a little bit of hesitancy, a little bit of like failing to creep sometimes when there's low visibility. I've noticed it's like much better at knowing when it has visibility. The old FSD just like wouldn't care. If it didn't have visibility, it would just go anyway sometimes and you'd be kind of afraid. But this version is kind of the opposite problem. If it doesn't have visibility, it's like very timid, creeping, almost too much. But it's a good sign that it doesn't that it knows when it doesn't have good visibility, but it needs to be a little more assertive. Then the most critical class of issues seems to be that the internal sort of occupancy network, they threw away the occupancy network, and they now have sort of this internal occupancy network within the thing. And it doesn't seem to be quite as refined as the old occupancy network. We had some issues where there were like some white sort of pillars in the road, like little plastic things, pedestrian don't cross sign, that kind of thing. And it seemed to be getting a little bit too close to those signs, whereas with V11, it was able to get right in between. So, I see a bug like this. I'm like, okay, I think it's really possible to make this better. We've seen how good the occupancy network has gotten. But at the same time, it seems to be a little bit of a step back in that way. And I've had times where I've had to take over due to it feeling a little bit too close to cars or things like that. So I think that is also part of that sort of internal occupancy network. I think they just need to feed in a lot more clips to the scale of the old occupancy network to really get it to surpass that level of quality. But I think it will actually surpass the old occupancy network once they do that, because with end to end, it's just so much more powerful. You can see so much more, like on top and on the bottom of the stack. It's not just generating this sort of representation of occupancy, but how does that actually translate into the driving policy end to end? And I think that's kind of just a much more powerful framework. So, yeah, those are probably the biggest things. The biggest annoyance for me is the stopping at the stop sign until the light turns green. Although I just have to push the accelerator for that. It's not that big of a deal, but I would love it if they could eliminate 75% of my accelerator presses by doing that. And probably the most crucial is uh, the occupancy network thing. But the biggest issue probably preventing the rollout is that it is it's kind of funny. It's sort of relearning a lot of bad behaviors they fixed in some cases because it's just kind of coming from the training data. But some of the NHTSA recall items, it's gone back on sort of handling them incorrectly. Like I've sometimes seen it roll stop signs in a very human sort of way, but obviously you have to stop to zero. So that's kind of fun to see, but obviously it's a bug. So they, they got to really dig through that point whatever percent. There was also a recall related to, being in a turn lane and getting out and signaling and that type of thing. And I've seen it mistakenly get in a left turn lane, but then decide to go straight to keep with the route and just kind of jumping back in. So that might be something they need to sort of address too. Um, I can see regulators really giving them a hard time about this update because it just is so human like in some of the behaviors and in ways that might make them nervous, like for example, you know moving before the pedestrian is 100% crossed out of the crosswalk, which is a huge usability improvement, but kind of keeps them nervous. So if I had to rank it, probably number one occupancy network stuff, number two NHTSA stuff, and making sure they just comply with everything, or else they're going to have to issue another recall fixing the same issues again, which doesn't really matter, but there's going to be headlines about it, obviously. And then my personal kind of pet peeve issue, the stopping at the stop sign until the light turns green.
Okay, thanks, Omar. That's really valuable information. And today we talked about Tesla Energy valuation. We talked about FSD V12 updates, and I created a YouTube account, Valley Analyst 1 on YouTube. I'm going to post snippets of these conversations as well as a full video for YouTube subscribers to see, or you can listen to the space here as well on X. And I also take notes during and after as I listen for a second, third time to these spaces and publish a summary, daily summary for patrons as well. Thank you very much, everybody. And I will talk to you tomorrow. Thanks, Omar. Thanks, Wes. Talk to you guys tomorrow.